Hello everyone and welcome to Ashburn Library. Today we're going to look at a new book that's come to the market called Mantles, Encountering Brigid, and it's by Shauna Gillian and Margo McNulty. Mantles is done by Arlene House, just as I said, a new publication, collaboration between writer Shauna Gillian and artist Margo McNulty, and it's a series of essays, fiction, photographs and photo etchings, and it reimagines new representations of Brigid as an archetype of the sacred feminine through engagement with artefacts associated with Brigid and site visits in Kildare, Dublin, Louth and Roscommon. It's described as a rich meditation of folklore, tradition and contemporary experience, and it is available in our libraries if anyone would like to borrow it. So Shauna, welcome this morning. It's a lovely morning this morning. Can you just tell us a little bit about the book and how it actually got published?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Mary, for featuring Mantles and for having me on for this chat. So yeah, so a little bit about the book. So the book is part of a larger project that myself and Margo got funding from Creative Ireland, part of Kildare County Council and Roscommon County Council. And it was published by Arlene House. And I'm sure, as you can tell, Alan Hayes did a wonderful job in the design, layout and the structure of the book and in terms of editing as well. So we were delighted to be able to, to finish the project with a book. As I said, maybe before we started recording, as we were doing the project, we weren't really sure what would come out of it, what type of book or, would it be short or long or whatever. So it was interesting in terms of the end results that it took the form of different types of things. It wasn't just stories, it wasn't just a history of Brigid or images of her, it was sort of a mix of everything. And I suppose that reflected the process for both of us, and that most of the project, what was half and half, was done during sort of the early stages of lockdown. So a lot of the site visits that we'd hoped to go on, we couldn't go on because we were restricted. And then as things began to open up, we also then were able to do a little bit of traveling around the country and meet each other and so forth. So I think the book reflects the actual process of doing the project and the research.
Yeah, I quite like it because it's a book that you can actually delve into different parts of it. You don't have to read it the way we would traditionally read it. You could delve in, you could read it, or you could go back and look at it again, different aspects of it. That's what I quite liked. A lot of people would know about St Brigid from their school days, and know that, St Brigid's Day is the 1st of February, and maybe some people would have learned how to do her cross. But a lot of people wouldn't really know a lot more about her. So can you tell us a little bit more about her life and her achievements?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great comment to make, Mary. I was the same as well. I knew Brigid from what I learned in school and through family. I took Brigid as my confirmation name. There's a lot of Brigids in my family along the female line. My daughter has Brigid in her name as well. And I suppose there's three main things that I found fascinating from the research. One was around the question of power, and I think some of the perceptions that we see of Brigid, Saint Brigid that we know of, that she's very passive and she's generous and she helps people, but actually, the figure of Brigid. Historically, she was an ordained bishop. She had over between 11,000 and 15,000 nuns, in her care, and so that was quite astonishing to sort of look at the different texts and see, are we looking at Brigid the goddess? Are we looking at Brigid the historical figure, or Brigid the saint? So there's different parts of the narratives that came through. So that was one thing, and I think parallel to that was sort of the interplay of power as the church began to gain momentum, because she was born into an era in this country where she was on the threshold of paganism and Christianity. And indeed, she was the daughter of a nobleman, and she was also the daughter of a slave mother, and she was raised in part by a druid. So we have all those things coming together in her, and I think that's, maybe symbolizes, can be seen in a lot of the symbols of her, I suppose some of the other things that came through that were sort of at times frustrating was the contradictions, so some texts, didn't cite that, she was given away by her father, to be raised by a druid, other texts don't cite that, other texts don't mention that she was the daughter of a slave woman. So there's lots of contradictions, even down to, the date of her birth and the place of her birth, so she's claimed by Louth, she's claimed by Kildare, she's sort of everywhere.
Everybody wants her.
Everyone wants her, it's true, but I think that comes down to, the way narratives were told. So it wasn't until well after 100 years after she died that the first written text was encountered, around 650. So that's interesting as well, on how stories then were obviously passed down orally, as was the tradition. I suppose the other element, just to tie in what you're saying, making crosses in school. So I would have been familiar, I'm sure, as most people are, with the RTE cross, as some people call it. And part of our research was we were talking to Clodagh Doyle in the National Museum of Ireland, and in Castlebar in Mayo, it's Museum of Country Life. They have a number of artifacts relating to British, including crosses, and in fact there's like 7 types of crosses. So the one that we know is just one of the types. So that was interesting to me as well. And also things like the Bridge Oak doll, representing Bridget, that children would go around with a white dress, which ties again into the idea of mantles, which is the title of the book, veils and dresses and brides, and all the different ways Bridget and her followers and women were, have the symbols and the artifacts associated with Bridget.
Okay. I mean, she'd have to be, like, from just what you've said there, the type of person, she'd have to be a very strong kind of a character, especially given in the time that she was living in, and the women at the time. So can you tell us a little bit about how she actually achieved to become like the abbess of these nuns?
Yeah, so she was very, very strong-willed, even as a young girl. A lot of the stories there's various tales about her power. Some of the neighbours, so her mother was working, and she'd be out milking the cows or whatever, and some of the neighbours would see sort of flames coming out of the cottage, and they might run in, and this is Bridget as a small child, and as a baby she would be fine. And you have the symbols of the fire coming in relation to her being ordained, that there's some stories that the bishops got overwhelmed by her power. They saw the fire going through the roof of the church, and that was her connection to God, so therefore she was that powerful, so she had to be ordained. And then there's stories that it wasn't meant to be, it was a mistake, that they got overwhelmed by her power and mistakenly ordained her. And then there's other stories then that say that she was most definitely meant to be ordained, because she had proved her worth in terms of the way she'd work in communities, her devotion to Christianity, despite her being daughter of a nobleman who's a pagan, and so on and so forth. So she really, really was, in terms of her personality and her strength. But also, I think when you drill down into the accounts, she was generous, but she wasn't passive, and she was giving, but not submissive. And I suppose that's what the big thing that she did was, she followed her heart, and she followed what she felt she knew. So she went along with 7 other women to form the monastery then. And part of forming that monastery was to give refuge to people who were enslaved, particularly women, and particularly those who society treated as outcasts, such as lepers. There's a lot of stories of her healing lepers, and also being quite enraged when others weren't following that idea, that were following her example of helping others. There's sort of humorous stories as well about her giving her, one of them is that she gives her father's sword away, full of jewels, when she sees a beggar passing, because the beggar needed it more than her. So again, it's all around social justice and helping others, and trying to get a society that's sort of freer and equal for everybody. And I think that's really for me anyway, what she symbolizes, and what she did with her life, in terms of helping others, and education in terms of education, girls and women and young boys and men as well.
And the book is the content is like the mix. It's got a mix of poetry. It's got a mix of essays. It's got lovely photographs throughout with all artifacts and places of Brigid. Why did you decide on this kind of style?
Yeah, that's a good observation. So I was saying earlier on that the book sort of mirrors the process of the project, you know, sort of following and looking for Brigid through artifacts, but also, you know, through land, really through the country. We were looking at different wells and different places associated with her. And there wasn't really, from my point of view, from the writing point of view, there wasn't a plan to write a whole lot of essays. I hadn't planned that at all. And I suppose because I did an awful lot of research, secondary research more than primary research, as it turned out, I found myself writing sort of reams and reams and reams of, I guess I was writing my way into the text of what I found out about her. And at the end, you know, I had this big, huge, huge, big, long text. I was saying, oh, what is it? So when I began to look through it, then I realized, okay, it's following, you know, again, the timeline, the chronology of this project, of this journey, and Margo's images do the same. So I divided it then up into 3 different essays. That's the triad of essays that speak to each other. And then along with that then are the 6 interlinked short pieces of fiction that reflect or reimagine on what we know of Brigid's life. So sort of following her through her life, you know, from a young child, the miracles she performed, you know, be able to feed the population around her, you know, with butter and all those stories that we know, and then on through the monastery, the formation of the monastery, and then to her death and after that as well. So that's really how it came about. Again, no plan. It just happened that way with the writing.
And you were talking about Margo's photographs. There's just some wonderful photographs, some places I hadn't actually seen before. Can you tell us about them? You told us one story about, I think, was it the cloak you were mentioning earlier on? The cloak, and where you got the access to that.
That's right. Yeah. So there's actually not a photograph of that in the book, but I do talk about a relic of St Brigid that I managed to go and see. So originally we'd hoped to go to the Brigidine archives, but because of COVID restrictions, unfortunately they were closed. And by the time they reopened, sort of in October time of last year, we were coming towards the end of the project. So the photos, the images in the book, I guess what they do is they sort of follow the visits to locations associated with Brigid. So Roscommon, Kildare and Louth are the main areas that we went to. And also objects and artifacts associated with Brigid held in the Museum of Country Life in Mayo. Margo was resident down there for last year as well. So her other project tied in a little bit with this one in that respect. So I suppose the site visits provided the frame around, you know, the images and the writing and how they all tie together. Just to go back to your earlier question in terms of structure, so that's in terms of the visuals in the book. So, and again, they sort of speak to the writing, you know, so they echo the essays. In the essays, I talk about the site visits a good bit, you know, who we met there. On both occasions, we went to the wells in Kildare and in Louth, in the Hill of Foggart. When we arrived initially, we were the only people, you know, and it was very, very quiet, which is interesting, you know. One was in sort of summertime, one was towards the end of summer and early autumn. We had other visits in between, but the main ones were those ones. That was interesting in itself to sort of see, you know, again, it was COVID times, so there weren't as many people around, you know. Like anything, timing is everything, isn't it? You know, things change according to time. So if we were to do that, you know, now with everything opening up, it might be a little bit different.
Her sites like still have all the like the little offerings and, you know, the rags tied and, you know, offerings to all of the wells and that around. I know Louth is very popular here, near enough to Meath, and that's a site that's well visited, especially around St Brigid's Day. So
it is, and we met people there then who were chatting to us about, you know, the people who live locally, and they were talking to us about different you know, things that go on every year around St Brigid's Day, but also sort of, as it were, the human traffic through the area and how it had changed with COVID, and it just didn't feel the same as it normally would, you know. But I mean, I think that'll change, and it is changing, as we know. Yes, people still leave. There's a lot of masks hanging on trees, as well as, you know, ordinary artifacts that you'd expect, you know, and I suppose that brought back as well to the times that we were living in, you know. The people still turn to Bridget and to her wells for solace and for hope. And I think I can't see that changing. It seems to be increasing, if anything, really, you know, very, very moving. We didn't really get a chance to go to other wells. Like, there's a beautiful one in Clare that I'm familiar with as well. And, you know, there's, you know, very, very many. In fact, there's hundreds of wells around the country devoted to Bridget, you know. So I think maybe the project isn't quite finished yet, while the book is finished at the moment. Maybe, you know, on a personal level, I would be interested in exploring more of those sites.
Yeah. And then next year we're getting a bank holiday in her honor. How do you think she'd feel about that?
I think she'd be delighted, and sort of about time, really. So that, like, she was as powerful, if not more powerful than Patrick, you know, in her time. And, you know, following on from that, there was a cult of Bridget across Europe. So that's really how powerful she was. And I think that's reflected in both place names, you know, and in people's use of the name Bridget, and all the variations of that, you know. I think that is absolutely fantastic that it's happening. I think, given our work with the vulnerable in society, it's apt that the bank holiday is also in honour of frontline staff, you know, in a pandemic where people were vulnerable and helped by, you know, all sorts of staff, but including a lot of women as well.
Yeah. Another writer sadly passed away that had done a lot of work on St Brigid as well. We'd just like to send out our condolences to the family and friends of Colm Keane, especially his wife Una, who gave us permission today to be able to, you know, just give the first two introductory pages to his book in St Brigid, and that's available too in our libraries at the minute. But just to let Una especially know that we're thinking about them all today.
Yes, indeed. And I'd like to pass my condolences as well. And Colm and Una's book was actually one of the ones I consulted for this book. I reference it in it. It's a wonderful book.
Shauna, thanks so much for taking part in this talk about your book. The book is available, as I said, to order from any of Meath libraries on our catalogue, and it's available in bookshops. So we're going to finish with you reading a poem from the book that was called Mother. Maybe just before you do that, will you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Mother came as part of the research. As I was saying, most of the research was done in the National Library of Ireland, so there was both primary and secondary sources there. And one of the books that I consulted was the rule books of the Brigidine Order. So some of these date back to sort of early 19th century and mid 19th century, and it was really interesting in terms of the clothing, and I found myself, you know, trying to figure out, well, what are these pieces of clothing? I didn't, you know, some of them you'd know, like a mantle or a veil, you know, ones that you might know in sort of in the secular world, and I was fascinated by the language that was used as well. So that combined with some of the visuals of Bridget in the books, that sort of overlapped with those of Our Lady and Mary, and, you know, they all sort of started to merge together. And then seeing Bridget as a mother to our nation, she was known as Mary of the Gale as well, sort of Mother Ireland. This is where this poem came from. So some of the text is taken from the sort of the words and descriptors from the rule book of the St Brigidine Order, and then the rest is just me sort of reimagining Bridget, encompassing all of those things. So I'll read it now. It's actually the only poem in the book. It's one short poem. Mother. Bridget, gem of our emerald isle, model, mother, clothe us with garments of charity and salvation, cincture, beads and cross, the scapular we kiss, shield us against earthly affections, deny ourselves in the gimp we pray. Remind us of the purity which should adorn sisters, brides, and spouses. The veil we kiss. Separate us from the vanities of this world, perpetually, everlastingly open-handed. Intercessor, mediatrix, protectress.
Shauna, thank you so much for taking part with this interview today and help us celebrate St Brigid's Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all your readers as well. Thanks very much.